Good morning, everybody. It is 9:14. We will officially open the 856th round of the Planning and Regulation Committee. Good morning to attending councillors and visitors, our EGM, council officers and support staff as always. We will launch straight into our program and go to attendance and apologies, which we have nil, no leave of absence to deal with as well. Confirmation of the minutes of the previous round. Someone to move those minutes. Councillor Fowler, seconder Councillor Martin. Any questions or concerns with the minutes? Councillor Fowler?
Just a small one through you, Chair. Just on page 14, it says D Marshall instead of N. Just a typo. It doesn't say OAM either.
If we'll take that, we'll take that as administrative things to tidy up. Any other questions or concerns with the minutes? In that case, we'll take the vote on the minutes. All those in favour? Against? The minutes are carried. A conflict of interest declarations. I'm not aware of any councillors, but is there any that anyone wishes to raise, formally or informally? That's a first. It's amazing we don't have DAs in the meeting. Okay. Councillors, starred items. So at the moment we have the forward planning schedule 6.2 and 6.3 starred. Councillor Doran, did you wish to touch CBus at all? Very good. So we'll unstar 6.2. And a question for 5.1, that's fine. 6.3 and 6.4 will be delivered together. So you can ask questions on 6.3 as part of 6.4, Councillor Fowler, if you're happy with that. We can deal with that at the same time. In that case, we'll take the vote on the starred item which is left, which is only 6.3. All those in favour? Against? Sorry, we might need a mover for that too. I'll move it. Councillor Fowler's happy to second. All those in favour? Against? And that's 6.3 dealt with. Councillor Doran, your question on 5.1?
I lied. 2 questions. The forward planning schedule has a review of acceptable impacts of temporary road closures. I was wondering if it isn't already, if the report could include the lessons learnt from the Robina Parkway closure recently. Thank you. And just one other question relates to 859. It says regulatory approach to election signage. I just was curious as to whether that would include any lessons learnt from the federal election, and I'm assuming that relates to enforcement of the proposed changes to our election signage policy.
Through you, Mr Chair, Councillor Doran, not sure it does, so I'll get back to you on that if that's okay. I'll send an email to all committee.
Thank you.
Councillor Fowler, question on 5.1.
Thank you, Chair, and through you, I just wondered why there was the lifestyle agenda items are included on page 22.
Through you, Mr Chair, Councillor Fowler, that was when we set up the terms of reference for the committees and what went to each committee. There was a decision at that time by Council that anything related to planning policy or planning scheme policy would go through this committee, so that's why they're on there.
Councillor Patterson, question on 5.1.
Thank you. Just regarding 859, the approach to signage, through you, if you've got the answer now, I have had requests from state representatives about public submission period. Has that been open or is that going to open?
Through you, Mr Chair, Councillor Patterson, can I take that on notice and I'll get back in the same email to Councillor Doran.
We're going to break a record for the most questions on the forward planning schedule ever. Anyone else? Councillor Young moves 5.1. Councillor Gates seconds. All those in favour? Against? The forward schedule is carried. That takes us to item 6.1. Officers, good morning.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair. Councillors, good morning. My name is Stacey Wallace, Coordinator Compliance Strategy within City Inspectorate, and I'm presenting item number 6.1, Adoption of Proposed Amendments to the Animal Control Area Register. I'll do a reasonably quick version of this presentation and jump straight into the 29 proposals we are recommending to proceed with for adoption, those being 15 additional dog prohibited areas, 12 additional or amended dog off-leash areas, and 2 revoked animal control areas, meaning 2 areas to no longer be dog prohibited areas and therefore becoming on-leash areas. I would like to note that if an area is not designated as a dog prohibited or a dog off-leash area, it is by default an on-leash area, and this includes our parks, beaches and foreshores. We're acknowledging that the proposed amendments to the Animal Control Area Register relate to amending Local Law Number 12, Animal Management, and allow the new, amended or revoked dog off-leash areas and dog prohibited areas to be implemented. Detailed information of each area has already been discussed with the relevant divisional councillor for all the areas considered in this ACAR review and provided within the report and the associated attachments. Of the 18 proposed areas for designation as dog prohibited areas, 15 are recommended to proceed. Community feedback was balanced with environmental impacts and operational considerations in these 3 instances where dog prohibition is not recommended to proceed for ACAR 2025. 16 areas were proposed for investigation for designation as dog off-leash areas or amendments to existing dog off-leash areas. 12 of these are recommended to proceed and 4 are recommended not to proceed. Division 12 saw Broadbeach Beach receive the highest number of community submissions, including the highest number in support of and also the highest number of submissions opposing the new timed dog off-leash area. The bulk of community feedback was in support of the proposal. However, the internal stakeholder feedback and environmental impacts were overwhelmingly against the proposal. While the community was providing their feedback, our internal stakeholders were able to investigate and have advice of the importance of the area for wildlife, including endangered and threatened turtle species, and the use of this beach and the surrounding area for nesting. There were concerns around environmental and health impacts associated with the increased dog faeces and urine, especially when dog waste is not collected and disposed of correctly by owners. We also had concerns for our impacts to our lifeguards, including aggression from non-compliant dog users and pulling the lifeguard attention away from those swimming between the flags. This proposal brings challenges for our enforcement officers as well, as increasing the need for patrols at this location will divert resources from other areas of the city, and that may require patrols for public safety. Additionally, the proposed area at Broadbeach Beach is at a location where sand is stockpiled and routinely utilised by city maintenance and external providers. Allowing dogs off leash in this area would negatively impact these operations, which are often emergency and unplanned responses. As a city, we currently provide over 5 kilometres of designated dog off-leash beach areas. We also have 25 dog off-leash areas with water access. The City of Gold Coast has confirmed it has no risk appetite for compromising safety and no risk appetite for compromising our natural environment. Now that we know all this information from our internal stakeholders and that there are several areas of concern, including but not limited to health and safety and environment, council officers are not able to recommend proceeding with Broadbeach Beach as a timed dog off-leash area. 4 areas were proposed for investigation to revoke the existing dog prohibition or dog off-leash areas, meaning that these areas would become on-leash areas. Upon review, 2 areas are recommended to proceed and 2 are not recommended to proceed. There were 3 other designations with specific considerations when balancing the needs of dog owners and the community safety, amenity and implications specific to this location. You will see the recommendations within the report relate to endorsing the amendments as detailed in Attachment 1 and updating the Animal Control Area Register accordingly. In conclusion, the proposed amendments in Attachment 1 are considered by council officers as the best outcomes for the city. We're considering the dog owners as well as the broader community needs while balancing the health, safety, amenity and the natural environment. Thank you.
Stacey, thank you. Councillors, questions for Stacey or other officers? Councillor Martin and Councillor Young.
Thanks, Chair. Just wondering, you mentioned about dog beaches with, I think it was 5 kilometres. Just wondering how many locations, how many off-leash beach dog areas do we have?
Yeah, so the big ones that we have are at Talabudra, Palm Beach South and the Spit. And then we also have 25 areas total with access to the water. So not all of these are beach and foreshore. Some of these are like the creek and stuff. Did you want me to list a few of them?
So it's just the 3 open beaches though?
Correct. Oh, sorry, through the chair. Apologies.
I guess reading, when we're looking at the beach trial in Mermaid, some of the risks, because obviously I have 2 dog beaches in Division 13, very well loved, potentially overloved at times. So couldn't help but see the risks that you were talking about with Mermaid. How does the city view the current dog beaches that we have? Some of those, it was a bit alarming, some of those comments, and I'm just wondering if we are looking at new areas and we're looking at the risks, how do we sort of consider the current risks to the current sites?
We are, through the chair, we are looking at some of the current areas and what mitigations can sort of happen there. There was also a change in legislation. So when these ones were historically approved, there wasn't necessarily the same criteria being applied that we have today.
Through the Chair, Councillor, just to elaborate on that, these specific comments were particular to this location, and that is primarily because of the proximity to the environmentally sensitive area. So those particular concerns really revolved specifically around that. In regards to, I guess, the broader use of other locations, other dog off-leash areas that are also on beaches, some of those aspects obviously still apply, but perhaps have additional mitigations through either compliance or by the fact that they are separated from, environmentally sensitive areas.
Follow up, Councillor Martin. Councillors, it was neglecting me at the start to point out this is Stacey's first time presenting to the chamber, so good work to Stacey on that so far. And as we always show abundant courtesy in this chamber, but we'll show the extra chamber to first-time presenters as always. Councillor Young, your question.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Stacey. Do you know when the next review of the animal control areas will be undertaken, please?
Yep. Through the chair, we're now doing this annually. So we'll reach back out to all councillors in August, September of this year to start the 2026 review.
Thank you.
Councillor Marshall and Councillor Doran.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for the presentation. I guess just in terms of the Mermaid Broadbeach section, do we have times that the sand stockpiling happens? Is it normal work hours, early morning, late night? It seems to be work hours that the sand trucks are coming in and out.
Through the chair, we believe that it's not always planned. It's as required, so sometimes it's early in the morning. They do use exclusion zones, so if it is ever something that they need to do, they'll put up exclusion zones, which is great for pedestrians because people know not to walk through the tape or the temporary fencing. Unfortunately, off-leash dogs don't know not to go through temporary fencing.
Yeah, follow up, I guess. I guess my issue sometimes with that is we use the temporary fencing. There's no fence around Patton Park where this dog park is, but under effective control, the owners are responsible to keep the dogs from the areas that aren't off dog lead areas. So the temporary fencing, I guess it's an exclusion zone, but if the dog's under effective control, it shouldn't just be running through an area anyway, surely. I find we use a rule. Well, I guess I'm going to frame it as a question, I guess, but yeah, I'm not sure why. Are you able to explain why, when we use effective control as a rule to delineate parts of a park as a reason for being one part of the park being dog off lead, the other park not being dogs in there off lead, but then why do we use, when we, in other areas, we have to have a physical barrier?
Through the chair, not 100% sure on the maintenance requirements that city maintenance use when they do that, but I assume it comes under a safety requirement for their heavy machinery to have the exclusion zone. And then as far as effective control, it is a requirement. It is part of owning a dog and taking a dog to an off-leash area. Unfortunately, we know that not everyone follows this, so we try not to allow situations where we predict that it's going to become an issue.
Councillor Doran.
Thank you, Stacey. Extra credit for the Rabina picture on the screen. Thank you.
Is that your dog?
No, not my dog. He's better well behaved. That dog, I mean. I just was going to follow up on something Mr. Connery said before. You talked about one of the reasons, through Chair, that Luke talked about that one of the issues with Division 12's Broadbeach Beach is compliance, lack of compliance. I imagine that would just be beefed up if there was an off-leash area. And then a quick comment on that. But then also in relation to the other comment around maybe the mess left by dogs, isn't that, again, something that is experienced at all off-leash dog areas and something that's managed accordingly? It does seem to be a bit like specific to not approving this area, whereas it's managed appropriately in other off-leash dog areas on the beach.
Through the Chair, Councillor, in terms of, I'll deal with the second one
Thanks.
first, if possible. So that's correct. I think there is obviously that risk of dog feces not being appropriately picked up by owners across all dog off-leash areas. It's been specifically identified for this location specific to the beach. So the concern was around other beach users and the impact on that specific area, noting it's got quite a high level of tourism in that particular area, a lot of visitation to that beach. So that was why that was particularly identified, but you're correct in that it is a concern across the board and is why we have compliance. Councillor, in terms of compliance, correct, there would be the ability to provide a layer of compliance if this was approved, but obviously then comes with additional resource burdens, but it would be able to be provided.
Follow-up, Councillor Doran. Councillor Fowler.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. Just a couple of questions for clarity when we're considering new fenced dog parks in our divisions, if I may. So firstly, can I confirm that any additional infrastructure, so when we're talking fencing, shelters, seating, agility equipment, etc., is always funded through our local area works budgets, as there's no additional central funding being provided? Has this always been the case?
Through the Chair, that's correct. It does come out of the law budget. I'm sorry, I don't know the history, if anyone is able to provide any insight.
Through the Chair, Councillor, I'm also not aware of the full extent of the history, but certainly since I've been in this role, that has been the arrangement.
So is that, through the Chair, is that the intention that will always be the case, that any consideration that we as councillors have for our own divisions, we need to consider that budget for that infrastructure will be coming from our local area works budgets?
Through the Chair, Councillor, I think for the short term, certainly that arrangement's still in place, but I'm always happy to consider other models, and we can look at the merits of that moving forward if need be.
And just additional, if I may, Chair, through you, so in terms of annual maintenance costs for a fenced dog park, including the items like turf replacement, repairs, general upkeep, I think it's important that we're also factoring in what that operational annual cost is for a dog park, so we can have that in the back of our minds when we're considering adding 10 new dog parks across the city and how much that will increase our operational maintenance costs. So happy for you to take it on notice if you don't know now, but I think it would be really useful for councillors to understand an average of how much a fenced dog enclosure is really costing the city in terms of maintenance and upkeep. So we can just consider that when we're making decisions for our division and also across the city.
Through the Chair, so we can definitely provide a baseline figure for that on notice if possible.
And one last one, Chair, if I may just quickly. I'm just noticed also that map 22, which is the only one in my division, is missing, which is the dog prohibited area for the Ben Daly Drive area in Helensvale. It just doesn't seem to be in there.
Through the Chair, apologies. We can definitely update
Thank
that.
you.
So Councillor Toes and then Councillor Patterson.
So just an answer to Councillor Fowler's question. The animal management team normally provides some reporting through the LUR committee, and there's a report that when any proposed new off-leash enclosure is subject to a report that's undertaken by that team that will give you some information about dogs per kilometre around your dog park. So there's like a metric that is done, so that report is available for any councillor who's got a proposed dog park and maybe, there's new dog owners. So.
Councillor Patterson, your question?
Yes, thank you. Through you, Chair. Back onto the Broadbeach Beach one. So my understanding is there's three real concerns. First is the nesting and hatching and endangered wildlife. The second is lifeguard concerns, and the third is the sand storage matter. I can't imagine that the environmental wildlife issues could be any more than what they are at the Spit, given the significant bird nesting at the Spit. So my question is whether you've placed, I don't know whether these are in priority, but you've placed the turtle one first. I was wondering if it has been considered just to exclude the time of the year when turtles are nesting and hatching, because it is a specific time of the year, and the same again for the sand stockpiling, whether there could just be exclusions for that, because it does seem to be two specific time-sensitive matters, which seem to be the main reasons for saying no.
Through the chair, there is a considerable window for the turtles. Apologies, I have it written down. I believe it's April through to June that the turtles generally will do the nesting and hatching. However, that can fluctuate with the change in temperatures and activities happening. The turtles can sort of come earlier or come later, so that window is quite significant. They can also be impacted by the scent of dogs and the amount of presence of dogs, so that has the impact as well. The stockpiling was more so just one of the many concerns, so it's not just one particular area. We do still also have the enforcement challenges that come with it. So officers are of the belief that it's not a suitable location.
Follow-up, Councillor Patterson. We're happy to leave it for now. Councillor O'Neill, your question.
Thanks, Chair. Just to Stacey, around the Betty Diamond Sporting Complex, I know that the football club officials were keen for dogs not to be on the junior field, and yes, it's not an elite field. I'm just wondering, because we have a sort of a mixed use all along that Betty Diamond Park and sports field, we've got off-leash area down on one end, then we have a fenced off-leash area, and then the rest is supposed to be on-leash. And I know that there was a lot of support for staying on-leash on the sports complex because people go and take their dogs when their kids are playing sport there. Is there any consideration to maybe putting some signage up actually on that sports field that dogs on lead are okay, just to hit home that you shouldn't be having a dog off leash on the sports field?
Through the chair, thank you. We can definitely do an audit of the signs. As one of the projects going on at the moment, we are auditing all of the dog off leash areas to review signage, so we can definitely do an audit of that area and see if additional signage is appropriate.
Thank you.
Councillor Gates.
Can I just make a comment about an experience I've had with dogs on active sports fields, and it's not a good thing.
No, we haven't.
It's a challenge.
Councillors, any further questions? So before committee, I received a proposed change recommendation from Councillor Marshall. As a courtesy I provide to all non-committee members, I'm happy to put that change recommendation up to be considered by committee. So my intent is, if there's a willingness I'm happy to move. There's a willingness for a seconder to allow Councillor Marshall to execute his argument and open debate, and then leave it to committee to decide if there's a willingness to do this trial period that's proposed. So I'm happy to move the proposed change recommendation, and if there's a seconder, I would then defer to Councillor Marshall to open debate.
I'd like to ask a question about it. Would you like to take that now?
That's fine. A question first, please. Is fine.
So through you, Chair. So with this, given the comments that we just received about the sensitivity from April to June or whatever, is the intention for this to be a 3-month trial to propose what happens ongoingly or just for that time of year?
Yeah, really good question. So that is why the trial's proposed. I mean, the dates I had were a little bit different, but I'm not going to argue with you on that one. But I guess my argument is that the dogs are already there. They're just there on a lead. So the scent and the smell, if it's putting turtles off, it's been a decade since we've had a loggerhead endangered turtle in that area. But the trial is a view of trying to see whether it will control behaviour. Largely, and I'll talk to it more, but the trial is also to try and separate people who are non-dog users and don't want to see a dog off lead on the beach, which is currently occurring every morning. So to let them know this is not an area to walk. And yes, you're right, like what happens at the end of the trial. At the end of the trial, I want to basically see whether it's changed behaviour, and it might just be that it's a seasonal thing each year, that when it's dark in the mornings and dark in the evenings, before and after work, there's a section on that beach for people to take their dog off lead to walk.
Councillor Curtis, do you have a question for question?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It's a question to the officers because my understanding of the ACAR, it's a very regulated process and I don't understand how a 3-month trial would fit in a local law change. Would you mind explaining the logistics of that?
Through the Chair. So, Councillor, when we came to Committee and Council to talk about the dog off-leash area guideline, there was some discussion during that particular committee about this particular concept of a trial, and subsequent to that we've been provided advice that it can be done within the register. In terms of the specific mechanics, I can provide that probably on notice, but it can actually be done in that particular way.
Councillor Doran is happy to second the change recommendation. As indicated, I'm happy to defer my opening to Councillor Marshall.
Thank you, Chair. And look, obviously I'm not on this committee, so I appreciate the opportunity to talk to it. I guess as you see, the amended change isn't just a time-restricted during the day off-lead dog area, but actually a seasonal one. And I guess to give some context, this has been a big issue in Division 12 for a fair period of time, long before I was elected, because the beach is an area where everyone recreates. We, population-wise, we all know as councillors, we have about 40,000 people in our division. I know there's some divisions that are a little bit more than that, but certainly Division 12 has close to 40,000 like others. And we've got a slightly higher than average dog population, but the reality is Division 12 is the smallest of divisions in area. We're only 18 square kilometres, so we have a higher, I guess, density of dogs and owners. And then added to that, we've got the least amount of dog off-lead areas. So people have taken to the beach to walk their dogs early morning, late afternoon, and have done that at their own risk, sometimes with their dogs off-lead, facing large fines. And that's understandable because that's the rules as they are. But probably the other thing that's come a lot in the last 12 months is people complaining to me that they're walking along the beach, they don't like dogs, they don't want to be troubled by a dog, but there's a dog off lead. And if you go down to our section in the mornings, there's dogs everywhere off lead, on lead. So the idea of this is to try and, I guess, change behaviour, let people know who don't want to come across a dog in the morning that this is a section where there will be dogs off lead, and those that want to have a dog off lead know that this is where to go. I guess I'm not really asking for a dog off lead beach, just to be clear. I'm really only asking for the eastern boundary of the already established dog off lead park, Pratton Park, to go from the sand dunes now to the water's edge from 5 till 7 in the morning and 5 till 7 in the afternoon, so before and after work. Like the officer said, there was overwhelming support from the community. There were people who objected, and I understandably, I took on board Luke's and the officer's comments around why this shouldn't go ahead. And I'll probably address both of those issues. I've tried to do a workaround with this change and with this trial so that it doesn't impact on the two main stakeholders. So main stakeholder number one, obviously, is our lifeguards. And I don't want to impact on the lifeguards. I don't want their role to be jeopardised at all, or, you know, their gaze taken away from what their job's to do. But the main lifeguard tower in this area is Tower 26A. It's not manned with a lifeguard from May through to November because there isn't the volume of people that use this area to swim. So it has no impact on this trial, has no impact on our city lifeguards. This is not a lifeguard area. Further to that, though, in terms of the environmental protection, obviously I get a lot of these questions about potential infrastructure builds down the track as well. This is an area that people talk about, the rare endangered loggerhead turtle in particular. It has been over a decade since we've had a turtle nesting there, but it can occur, so I'm not denying that. Having spoken to a few experts in this area, my information, maybe a month or two different, was that they nest from November through to basically, I guess, the end of May, but I'll take June as well. So this proposed seasonal trial has no impact on the lifeguards. It has no impact on the turtle population. And I guess in terms of the sand stockpiling and the exclusion zone, you know, we do talk about effective control, dog control, and the Pratton Park area, which is an already established off-lead dog park with parking, dog facilities. It has no fence around it, and it borders a main road. That's the main sort of corridor for school drop-off and pick-up for Broadbeach Primary. So in the past, we've asked for a fence on that road so that dogs don't run out in the road, and the response I got was, no, dogs need to be under effective control. So we're not going to put a fence and a barricade there. So I think if we can't put a barricade there to stop dogs running on the road because they need to be under effective control, then that same rule should apply for a roped-off section that's where people are stockpiling sand. Look, I really hope this was an overwhelming thing for my division with a lack of opportunities to walk with their dogs off lead. I respect the fact that the officers came up with good reasonings why it couldn't occur, and that's why it hasn't occurred previously. But I certainly hope that the trial, 12-week trial, I guess it won't make everyone happy, but it can make everyone a little bit unhappy and give everyone an opportunity to see whether it works or doesn't work. Look, I understand at the end of that, there'll be other factors at play, the lifeguards and the turtles that will have to stop the trial. But I think I don't want to get to a position where something's just too hard or we don't at least try it. And so I'm certainly asking councillors for support on this one. To at least do the trial this year, and if it comes around next part of the ACAR that it's just a seasonal thing that we do to avoid the lifeguards and the turtles, then so be it. But I'd really appreciate a trial on that one.
Speaker against? Question first and speaker against.
Thank you, Chair. And through you, Councillor Marshall mentioned he's requesting 5 a.m. until 7 a.m. and set 5 p.m. till 7 p.m. But I noticed that the change recommendation only has the morning 5 a.m. till 7 a.m. Could I just get some clarity on that?
I think, Councillor Marshall, we might need to add on the 5 p.m. to 7 p.m.
Yeah, my apologies. Yeah, we do. Sorry. Just to the change recommendation.
Very good pick up, Councillor Fowler. I'm happy to accept that change. Councillor Doran, you still happy to second that motion? Very good. Any further questions before I go to speaker against? Councillor Young, speaking against.
Well, yeah, I've got some concerns given the content of the report that we've been provided and the analysis that's been undertaken, and I'm not very comfortable about us just overriding that. And what would be the purpose of this trial? Would it be to consider a full-time edition or just a seasonal edition? Because that's not clear in the motion.
So, Councillor, is that a question or speaking against?
It's a question, and I spoke against, and I'm asking a question.
That's right. Do you want to pose the question to an officer or to Councillor Marshall?
No, I'm posing it to you.
Oh,
is the intent of your change recommendation for a seasonal trial, for this seasonal trial to inform a seasonal application of the dog off-leash area, or is it not restricted to that season?
So in discussion with Councillor Marshall, when he asked me to introduce this change recommendation, my understanding is it is to get more evidence to back up the officer's position, that while I think there's a great respect for the officer recommendation, their points of view, that there was not a lot of evidence to support that, and that a trial would bring that evidence. That, and I think from talking to Councillor Marsh, I don't wish to put words in his mouth, but I think he's very much of the opinion that if this trial doesn't work and it doesn't change behaviours, then he's happy not to support this proceeding forward. But there's a hopefulness from the community that maybe it'll show that behaviours can be managed more appropriately, and that we can mitigate those impacts, and that there might be the opportunity for his community to continue to have this in future years. But that's the point of Part 5, is that the trial is only committed to 1 year, and as part of the next ACAR review, we review the findings of it and get a reassessment from officers and a reassessment from the local councillor and his community if it was a success or not, and if it should proceed forward into the future or not.
Thanks for your answer.
That's cool. Do you have anything else to add, Councillor Young, and you're against?
Well, I'll just say this. I'll be voting against it, but if it gets up, I would anticipate and hope that the report that comes to us does look at the seasonal application of the introduction of a off-leash facility, because the report provides us pretty strong reasons for not doing it.
Right. Thank you, Councillor Young. A speaker for the motion, Councillor Martin. Question?
Just to follow on from Councillor Young's queries, has there been any reporting on our current or impacts to turtles on our existing beaches? And I acknowledge that they are historical and they've been there, but I'm just wondering if there's any documentation that you might be able to share as part of this reporting that there has or hasn't been impacts in other locations in the ocean beach.
Through the chair, we might be able to get a response from another officer on that.
Sorry, through the chair, could I have the question again, please? Sorry.
Yeah, my question is the discussion around impacts to potential turtle nesting. I'm just seeking to understand what reporting have we done on the existing off-leash dog beaches. So we're looking at a trial here, but it brings up some alarm bells for me in other areas. And we touched on it earlier that there's some historical approvals, but I'm still really interested in, are there any impacts? And you might not have the information now, but certainly want to have that in the full context of any future report. But happy if you've got any comments on that.
Yeah, no worries. Through the chair, to the best of my knowledge, I'm not sure whether we've investigated those existing areas at the moment for those impacts. One thing that we have been looking at that's been prompted through this current review is whether there are any new legislative requirements that might impact new dog off-leash areas. We believe that there may be, and that we're still currently looking into it, and that we would be seeking legal advice, would be our recommendation moving forward. Whether that applies to the existing areas or not, I don't know. The legislation came in 2020. The previous version of the legislation, at least at an officer review level, has not found this same provision. I do have the provision if you would like to hear it. Yeah. So under the Nature Conservation Animals Regulation 2020, there is a section on tampering with animal breeding place. And it states, a person must not, without reasonable excuse, remove or tamper with an animal breeding place that is being used by a protected animal to incubate or rear the animal's offspring. An animal breeding place is being used by a protected animal and the animal's offspring if, and then there's a specific section, the animal has used the place to incubate or rear the animal's offspring and is of a species generally known to return to the same place to incubate or rear offspring in each breeding season. At an officer level, we believe that making this a dog off-leash area may conflict with that requirement, but that's something that we wish to take further through some legal advice. And whether that applies to the existing areas, I don't know.
Follow-up question, Councillor Martin. Are you happy for me to go to Councillor O'Neill?
Yeah, thanks for that. So If that was out of season, though, I understand that would be the view if there was a breeding site, but off season, if that wasn't to be there, can this trial still continue in that capacity? But separately, if we're getting advice, it would be my view that we seek that advice on those existing sites if there's any potential impact.
Yes, through the chair. Our interpretation of this particular provision would lead us to think that it's any time of the year, even if it's a seasonal species, that we shouldn't be impacting on the habitat, not just during the parts of the year that the animal is there. Again, that's an officer level interpretation of the legislation that we would seek advice on.
I'll just check first, Councillor Neal. Did you have a question, or were you looking to speak for the motion?
I actually want to speak against it.
That's all right. I'll come back to that. Question from Councillor Tozer. Question, Councillor Marshall. And Councillor Marshall, because you've opened debate, we'll have to keep it to a clean question, please.
Yeah, no, I'm just in the legislation I'm interested in. I don't want to do anything against legislation, but just in terms of impacting the nesting area, I mean, these are areas that are flooded with people. They're not signposted. They're not labelled. I've paddled there for 35 years on that stretch beach. I've never, seen people told not to dig there, families not to dig out a cabana there. So I guess I'm interested in what that looks like with relation now to dogs. I mean, I guess the dog can sniff something out, but a kid can dig something out. So if that's the case, then so be it. But I'm interested to know more about like the legislation around that sort of area. Wouldn't that mean any impact would be human impact, a dog on lead impact, as much as a dog off lead, surely?
Through the chair, if I could just provide a level of clarity before we get a response on that. Councillor, I think in terms of this legislative question, that is an ongoing investigation that needs to be done, and there needs to be proper advice provided in the context of this particular ACAR round. There is nothing preventing this committee or council from endorsing or not endorsing the recommendations.
Speaker for the motion, Councillor Tozer.
Thanks, Councillor Hamill. I just want to say a few things just about this process. The ACAR process some years ago was pretty spontaneous at times. There wasn't a general annual cycle, and it's been really great to see the team take some feedback from councillors and really institute that annual cycle of process that necessarily has to occur in order for there to be sufficient community consultation in order for us to adopt a local law. That they've captured in a 12-month program is really good, and I think that'll provide certainty for councillors who have lots of dog owners in their divisions. So I first wanted to say, look, I'm really supportive of this motion whilst I can't vote today because that annual process has been implemented. In my division, notwithstanding the pressures on the beach, we have a dog off-leash area that is historically got equestrian activity inside the off-leash dog area, and it's Pioneer Downs Park. It's mentioned in the report as something where we're not going to proceed with, and the general feedback I got from my office was that there was just over a reasonably long period of time there'd been incidents between dogs and horses, which are quite dangerous at times. And as we went through this process, we were able to engage the community, and surprisingly, we got over 100 responses from members of the community who wanted to offer their feedback about, through the ACAR process, about this particular park. And had it not been for that process, we wouldn't have got such a cogent outcome, which is effectively to not proceed with what we were proposing and actually deviate from that and then go through the process over the next 12 months to come up with a better solution. So I just wanted to note for my community's benefit that at Pioneer Downs is still under review. We'll be coming up with a solution in that park that does manage that coexistence of horses and dogs, and whilst right now we haven't found the right solution, we're not far away from coming up with a solution that can manage that risk but also deliver a great outcome for people who love their horses and their dogs in the hinterland. Thanks.
Councillor O'Neill, you wish to speak against still?
Yes, thanks, Chair. And I do appreciate Councillor Marshall's sentiments here, because I too get a fair bit of pressure from residents who live in the beach areas and have dogs and want to take their dogs to the beach and let them run around. That's great. But the amount of non-compliance I see at the moment, really, I am resisting that. And we have actually, I had put forward a petition about a trial in a area between two lifeguard towers, and the advice was similar to what the advice is now, that the lifeguards did not support it, and nor did animal management officers. And I have to say, since that time, that was a couple of years ago, and since that time I realised the right decision not to trial it was made. I don't think that Councillor Marshall realises how many people will actually come to this area. It will create a parking problem, an overcrowding on the beach. And the other thing that may happen, and I can't say it will happen, but because people sometimes don't follow the rules, those hours may not come into play at all, and it just could open a whole can of worms. I'm not prepared to do it in my division, and I can't support this either. I just think that we do supply a lot of off-leash dog areas on the Gold Coast, across the whole Gold Coast, more than a lot of other local government areas. So I'm sorry, Councillor Marshall, but I can't support this.
Speaker for the motion, Councillor Doran.
Thank you, Chair. I'm supportive of Councillor Marshall's request to add the trial for a couple of reasons. There were 319 submissions for and 83 against. The lifeguards, as Councillor Marshall just indicated, won't be there at that period of time anyway. The time is sensitive in terms of the dates to avoid the worst impacts on the environment. And there is an off-leash dog park called Pratton Park just on the other side of the Ocean Way. But I think there's also a time in every off-leash dog area where it wasn't an off-leash dog area, and it has to be, in some instances, taken a chance to see whether or not it will work as an off-leash dog area. And I go down to up to the Spit and down to Palm Beach Parklands a lot, and I think it's a privilege that we're able to use them for off-leash dog areas. But I think one of the things that I'm frustrated by is human behaviour as a reason for not doing it. Some people break the law or break rules all the time. There are going to be conditions in place here, time conditions and also date conditions. And just because we're trialling an off-leash or proposing to trial an off-leash dog area doesn't absolve a user's responsibility to follow those rules. Have a dog under effective control, pick up after your dog, don't go outside the boundaries, come back in at that time which is prescribed. And I think that those people in Councillor Marshall's area that want this to be an off-leash dog area have it within their own power to ensure it could potentially become a permanent one by simply following the rules. And doing it as per the prescribed guidelines. And if they do that, the impact on other beach users should be minimal. The impact on the environment should be minimal because there will be a prescribed area they can be in. And the reality is it is a trial that will inform a report to then come back and determine whether or not it's appropriate to be a permanent park. And the ultimate view of this trial will be the success or not will be how the humans behave with their dogs. It won't be the dogs. It's always the humans, and the reality is the majority of the time, sorry, Councillor Neal, the absolute majority of the time. But the reality is if the folks adhere to the rules and do the right thing, the results of the trial could be favourable to a more permanent outcome. And for that reason, I think that we should give it a go, and I respect Councillor Marshall's interpretation on what his community thinks is required there. I respect the officer's view that this could bring some problems, and I also have full faith in their ability to manage them, and quite frankly also speak honestly and truthfully if it's not working before the 3 months are up. I'm sure that a hard conversation with Councillor Marshall in that time could result in an early ending of the trial. But as I say, Chair, it's in the hands of the people to respect the limits that have been put in place, and I'm going to put my faith in them.
Speaker against, Councillor Gates.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to say at the outset how supportive I am of the process and appreciate the support from the officers right through this process. I'm very concerned about the legislation, and I don't like supporting something like this when we have just been told that there's a doubt about whether it can even be introduced. So although I would love to support Councillor Marshall, I would prefer to wait and have a clear understanding of the legislation and its impacts, not only on the potential for a trial, but on the existing off-leash areas that are on the beach. I have an additional concern about compliance resources that might be necessary due to this only being a trial between certain hours of the day and the complexity of the community becoming aware of precisely those hours and sticking to it. I'm concerned about the turtle breeding being an exclusion period, and also informing the community about the extent of that period, because even the officers aren't sure of when it would start and when it would finish. My view is that Pratton Park is adjacent, and for everyone that wants to have their dog trot around off leash, there is an alternative close by, and for that reason I won't be supporting this amendment.
I'll foreshadow the officer's recommendation.
Councillor Patterson speaking for.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I have a off-leash waterfront park in my division, which is only available in certain hours, like I can't remember exactly times, but 5 to 7 in the morning and the evenings. And it is amazing how well it works for the community. People know when to be there, people know when not to be there, people know when to take their child down for a play, and if that child doesn't want to be there when the dogs are, the community knows how to make that work and creates that balance. So I'm looking forward to seeing whether this can happen. I do share Councillor Gates's concerns about the legislation, but I am assured by Mr Connery that this process can occur now, and even if it isn't his recommendation, he sees it as acceptable. I do have a question, though, if I may, with something that Councillor Gates has raised. If information comes to officers that there is a legislative concern, environmental concern, that we cannot do this, I would assume that you would come back to council or something would occur so that we do not proceed with the trial?
Through the Chair, Councillor, that's correct. We would be required to come back to this committee and council.
Okay, so based on that, I'm happy to support this trial. Thank you.
Speaker against? In that case, Councillor Young has foreshadowed the officer recommendation, which I appreciate Councillor Young doing that. I will close debate very quickly just in saying that I agree a lot with what has been said today around the fact that this is a trial, and that while I support the officer's recommendation and findings, I think Councillor Marshall raised some very pragmatic, common sense points around that they are things that can be mitigated or dealt with, or there's an opportunity for a 3-month trial to show if they can be, and to understand the cost of that in the long term, what they might look like. We never do it lightly to go against officer recommendations, but I think we've got a great example today of a local councillor challenging the organisation and challenging officer recommendation on behalf of his community. I think it's fairly fair to see the amount of responses that came back on this particular one, that there's a very strong interest from Councillor Marshall's community, and I personally feel we owe it a chance to run a trial for 3 months and see if this can be effectively mitigated in the long term. I do that in the full knowledge that if that 0.5, that report that comes back in the future, that will include an update of how the trial went, where it caused concerns, where it didn't. If that trial comes back to us and says it's just not practical to continue doing in the future, then my position on that would change. Councillors, we will close debate. Because it's a change recommendation, I will call division. So all those in favour of the recommendation? Councillor Hamill, Councillor Fowler, Councillor Patterson, Councillor Martin, Councillor Doran. Against? Councillor Young, Councillor Gates, Councillor O'Neill. The change recommendation is successful. Councillor Marshall, well done to you. Stacey, well done to you as well. Congratulations, your first time through the chamber. We will move on to item 6.2. the EGM needs to duck outside and take a phone call. Councillor Doran, there's a short presentation of this one. Or do you want to go straight to questions? Good morning, Rebecca.
Good morning, Chair. Thank you. In 2024, Seabus Stadium had 2 transport and traffic management plans to manage the road network and ensure the safe movement of patrons attending events at Seabus Stadium. Each plan was tailored to the expected crowd size, either below or above 7,500 attendees. For events with fewer than 7,500 patrons, the only impact on the city's road network was the closure of parking bays on the eastern side of Stadium Drive. These bays were closed from 8 a.m. on event days by traffic controllers to provide accessible parking for people with disabilities. For events with more than 7,500 patrons, the impact was greater. In addition to the parking bay closures, again from 8 a.m, the northbound lane of Stadium Drive was closed 90 minutes before gates opening, with a contraflow of traffic implemented on the southbound lane to allow residents with a stadium-issued pass in and out of their property. The Robina traffic area was also activated, with Seabus Stadium staff installing event day panels on existing entry statement signs in advance of the event and placing corflute signs on entry points on event day to reinforce the 2-minute parking restrictions. At the conclusion of the event, Queensland Police hold all traffic to provide a safe and efficient egress of patrons. A single permit was issued to Seabus Stadium for the entire NRL season, covering both plans. In preparation for the opening of Greenheart Stage 1 in March 2025, and in response to isolated incidents of illegal parking on event days, the temporary road closures team worked closely with Seabus Stadium, their nominated traffic management company and Queensland Police to consolidate the 2 plans and update a single document to effectively address and mitigate the emerging issues. Next slide. Thank you. To support a more thorough review of the plan for Seabus events, the temporary road closure team engaged a drone contractor to monitor the Matildas football match, which occurred in December 2024, capturing both vehicle and pedestrian movements. The image shown is a heat map, well, maybe a pedestrian lava flow with hot, fast and completely unstoppable pedestrians exiting the stadium. This illustrates the large-scale pedestrian exit from the stadium and supports Queensland Police's decision to temporarily hold traffic for approximately 20 minutes post-event to ensure pedestrian safety. The plan review process was detailed and progressive, with changes introduced in stages and evaluated after each event. One key improvement was the installation of additional corflute signs by Seabus Stadium in areas with recurring illegal parking, which reiterated the Robina traffic area restrictions during the 2 sold-out matches, the football matches in September and December 2024. The updated plan for 2025 was finalised ahead of the scheduled Green Day concert, which unfortunately was cancelled due to a cyclone, and the first 2 NRL games of the season. It now accounts for a variety of event types and crowd sizes with tailored mitigation strategies. Following the comprehensive review, several updates have been introduced to the 2025 Transport and Traffic Management Plan to enhance safety, accessibility and overall event day experience. Those include additional corflute signage in local streets to reinforce parking restrictions, deployment of marshals at key crossing points when attendance exceeds 20,000, consideration for public access to Greenheart Stage 1 during events. The expected outcomes of the plan update include improved awareness of traffic restrictions, maintaining access for the local government, local community to reach their homes and Greenheart Parklands, improved pedestrian flow, better vehicle management, and reducing illegal parking. Sorry. That's it. That's it. Thank you, Chair.
Questions for Ravina or for officers? Councillor Doran. I'm happy to move it, Chair. Councillor Doran's happy to move. Seconder for the recommendation, Councillor Fowler. Councillor Doran, you wish to speak to the item?
Yes. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ravina Michael. This item is in response to a general business item that I raised last year in the lead up to the opening of Greenheart Robina Parklands, but also in response to, in my short term as the councillor, what I felt to be an unacceptable traffic outcomes from Cbus Stadium event days, particularly with the success of the Titans increasing their crowd numbers. It was my view, which was reflective of the feedback I was getting from the community, that it wasn't quite fit for purpose at that time. And digging into it a little bit further, Chair, the traffic management plan hadn't changed in its in much at all since 2018. And so the evolution of the Titans, the growth of the residential community surrounding Stadium Drive, and also the imminent opening of Greenheart Robina Parklands required this to be reviewed, and reviewed with the sensitivities of those stakeholders in mind. I was really pleased by the work of City Officers, Chair, in taking on this task and working really delicately and forcefully with Cbus when required. It's a good negotiation strategy. And I think that they've arrived at a really good outcome where the extraordinary popularity of Greenheart Robina Parklands is now crystallised. Every weekend, I think every car park is just about full, and managing access to that for all the families, not just of my area but of surrounding areas too, is really important. But one of the other key things that I'd like to highlight is, whilst we're appreciative of Cbus Stadium's new traffic management plan, councillors should know that they weren't at first the most willing person on that journey, and city officers did a great job in arriving at outcomes that have genuinely improved the flow of traffic around Cbus Stadium and allowed for access to Greenheart. I've got some statistics on the infringements that have been issued in the 3 home games to date, and whilst they're still too high, I would prefer 0. We know that that's not achievable. They are much better than they were last year, so it is working, and I'm appreciative of that. The other thing that I think we should consider moving forward is that this is a monthly traffic management plan that's been supported. It is not an annual one. And so if we know and we see from experience that the traffic management around event days isn't working, we can make changes on the run in concert with the operator, which I think is a really great opportunity to have, to be able to continue to modify this as we deal with the impacts of such an incredibly popular parkland and a football team that's got a growing supporter base, Chair. I want to just close with, there will be people that choose to park illegally within traffic management areas on event days. I'm, in this instance, looking to do 2 things, and I think the city officers have achieved this. We're looking to make sure we provide access to Greenheart Robina Parklands to as many people as possible, as much as possible, but also to try to limit the infringements issued for inadvertent illegal parking, which is just essentially unknown, might be the first time they've been to the stadium. And I think that we're going some way towards getting there on that. And I'm grateful for the work of city officers, but I will say this to Cbus and the events that they hold there. We are still watching. We're watching very closely. I will still represent my community's concerns, Notwithstanding, I will also give a shout out to Todd Harris, for the CEO of Stadiums Queensland, for his engagement on this matter. I think all parties now working together will result in a better outcome, and I'm appreciative of the city officers' efforts to get to where we are. Thank you.
Speaker against the motion? In that case, I was just going to add, I think we need to acknowledge that Councillor Doran has spent a lot of time on his bike and out walking Boone over the last 12 months every time there is an event on at the stadium, and that there has been a lot of on-the-ground feedback and evidence and photos and recordings given to officers to help assist with this. I know officers have noted that with me on several occasions that they've really enjoyed. Sometimes they're very frank conversations with CBUS and others around what needs to change, but that has been driven by a local councillor determined to bring a balance to the needs of the stadium and the events it's holding, but also right for the needs of the community that surround that stadium he represents. Councillor Doran, you happy to take your opening as closed as well? In that case, we'll take the vote. All those in favour? Against? Motion carried unanimous. Officers, thank you very much. That moves us to item 6.4. Councillors, we're just waiting for Alicia to come back in. So is everyone happy to take a 5-minute adjournment and we'll start back off? Meeting adjourned for 5 minutes. Thank you. Let the record show that Councillor Doran has left the meeting and will be back with us as soon as he can be. We'll reconvene the meeting at 10:27 and go to item 6.4. Just a note for councillors, officers are happy to take questions on content that was part of 6.3 as well as this. We'll call it a combined presentation and questions on both. And we'll hand over the officers. Good morning.
Through the chair, good morning. Thank you for having me. My name's Emma Davis and I'm pleased to present our monthly update on the new planning scheme program and also bring forward the local growth management strategy directions paper. So a brief update on the planning scheme program from the past month. The State Interest Reference Group has been established and the first meeting has been scheduled. The Urban Change Readiness Program Close the Loop campaign was undertaken between the 23rd of April and the 14th of May. As part of this, it was a closing the loop with the community, bringing back the community findings from the engagement that was undertaken late last year and reporting on those community growth priorities, as well as seeking expressions of interest for the industry reference group and the community reference groups, which closed on the 14th of May. Expressions of interest were also sought for a 300-person community insights panel. Technical background reports and policy work is also continuing. As part of the Close the Loop campaign, the primary purpose being taking those findings back to community and stakeholders, expressions of interest were also sought for those three groups, and I can present the numbers on those EOIs today. We received quite a large volume of visits to that page and applications received, so 56 for the industry reference group, 105 for the community reference group, 155 EOIs for the community insights panel, and 170 EOIs for either the Community Insights panel or the Community Reference panel. The top three suburbs by interest for these groups was Surfers Paradise, Palm Beach, Upper Coomera. The assessment of these applications is currently underway. For the assessment of these applications, criteria varies by group. So for the industry reference group, focus on statutory and strategic planning experience, as well as industry group and sector representation, relevant skills and experience, as well as demographic and geographic considerations. For the community reference group, looking for community group and sector representation, as well as relevant skills and experience, demographic, geographic considerations. Community Insights panel is primarily focused on demographic and geographic representation. We have made some substantial progress on the local growth management strategy and have reached a point of presenting the draft directions paper today and also planning for an upcoming community conversation subject to council endorsement. So to this point, we have worked through gathering community insights, identifying the growth vision for the city, undertaking that early community conversation with the Urban Change Project, testing these growth opportunities and assessing our infrastructure network. And all of this has culminated into the draft directions paper. The intent of the upcoming community conversation, which subject to council endorsement is proposed to occur in June, July, and I'll go into a little bit more information about that shortly, will centre around the directions for growth. The community conversations will then feed into, and the draft directions paper will feed into the development of the local growth management strategy. So in the last few months, we have been undertaking internal and councillor engagement to prepare the directions paper. In addition to the directions paper, we've also prepared an executive summary to support particularly community engagement on the directions paper. It's a highly readable, digestible version of those key messages that can be found in the directions paper. Of which outlines 8 citywide directions for growth, as well as sort of bedding those directions for growth down into 3 concepts that demonstrate how these policy directions could shape the future growth of the city, being our centres, corridors and neighbourhoods. as you'd be aware, in the Urban Change Readiness Project late last year, the community told us what their 9 priorities for growth were, and we were able to take these to inform the 8 directions for growth. Our 8 directions for growth, which I'll go through in a bit of detail. Number 1 being well-planned and distributed growth. The objective of this direction is that new development is focused in existing well-serviced and resilient areas to optimise infrastructure use, preserve environmental values and reduce pressure on coastal areas while increasing housing supply and choice across the city. Direction 2, movement and transport choice. The objective of this direction is that our land use pattern supports transport choice by locating more homes in proximity to public and active transport connections, increasing transport choice to more than 1 million residents and visitors. Direction 3, a network of connected green spaces. A connected network of green space across the Gold Coast supports biodiversity, facilitates wildlife movement, strengthens environmental resilience, deepens our connection with nature, and supports an active and outdoor lifestyle and sustainable travel. Infrastructure that services a growing city. Infrastructure is delivered in a timely and targeted manner, addressing service gaps, improving efficiency, and ensuring infrastructure investment aligns with land use planning to accommodate population growth while reducing risks from natural hazards and making the city more resilient to climate change. Well-designed centres and neighbourhoods. Well-designed centres, corridors and neighbourhoods across the Gold Coast serve as vibrant hubs for community life, integrating diverse housing and lifestyle options with accessible jobs, retail and recreational space, encouraging low-emission lifestyles and strengthening our local identity. Building on our economic strengths. Build on our city's existing strengths in construction, tourism, film, education, healthcare and emerging industries to drive sustained economic growth, deliver new jobs and an economy with international exposure. Celebrating traditional owners' aspirations, values and places, Aboriginal and Torres Strait voices and our heritage. Our traditional owners and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voices are heard in planning for the future growth of the city, and our heritage places are valued, protected and accessible. And lastly, an inclusive and accountable planning and development process. Enhance transparency, accountability and community engagement in planning and development processes to build trust and confidence among stakeholders as our city grows. Now, for each of these directions, we've developed a range of potential initiatives, ways to achieve these outcomes, which can be found in the directions paper. So a big part of an important part of the development of a local growth management strategy is an ongoing community conversation, which we started late last year with the Urban Change project. And as I've mentioned, recently closed the loop on that aspect of the engagement. So upcoming from here, we have, subject to council endorsement, are proposing a community conversation in mid-June to early July to focus on seeking feedback on the directions for growth, including the potential initiatives to advance these directions. Following that, it's also proposed that a subsequent conversation in sort of later 2025 would also support the development of the LGMS by seeking feedback on how the proposed growth would sort of be seen in our centres, corridors, neighbourhoods, and in how the community would notice those changes. That means that what's next is that we can pull all this community feedback into the development of the LGMS as we move towards the end of 2025. Yeah. Okay. That's it for the presentation. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to take questions or go into anything in further detail.
Councillors are missing me again. Sorry to point out this is Emma's first time presenting today as well in chambers. Officers took the opportunity with a slightly less full agenda to make sure that some new officers had the opportunity to come and present. So Emma, congratulations on that. With that, we'll go to questions, which I think Councillor Young had his hand up first, and Councillor Fowler.
Thanks, Chairman. Good morning. Thank you for the presentation. I wonder about the community involvement. I'm just looking for the proper title, the community engagement. And you've received lots of applications. Will you be advising us of the successful, those that are selected, please?
So possibly Alicia or Trina, do you want to explain the process of what's going to happen with the expression of interest?
So there is a privacy element to some of those groups where people have applied online, part of the EOI process. We certainly will be explaining that selection criteria and notifying those officers, notifying those people who have applied. Did we have a view on how we were sharing those with the rest of the councillors?
Perhaps with community groups that privacy consideration wouldn't apply. You could at least let us know that.
Sure.
So, through you, Mr Chair, Councillor Young, what we were proposing to do was, once we have a coordinated look at who we think will make up those groups, we're going to let council know. In the interest of time, we were going to send an out-of-session email to councillors and just explain what the metrics that we use to actually define who was successful and then what that makeup was at that point in time. So that was what we were proposing at the moment. Happy to talk about that and change that tab, but we weren't proposing to come back with a separate report on that.
I think it's appropriate that you would make that decision and inform us if that's intended. What's the timing of that likely to be, please?
Through the chair, we are trying to get through that very quickly because we need to get moving with some of these groups, and we'd like to have something completed in the next 2 weeks.
Great, thanks. I just wanted to make a comment if I can, Chair. I had a meeting with Malcolm Griffin maybe last week. We were having discussion about the concept of the neighbourhoods, which is one of those 3 key areas that we're looking at, how we will shape the future growth of the city. And I mentioned to him my personal support for intensifying development in centres like Nerang or even in Pacific Pines, where we've got commercial facilities and services, and not endorsing or supporting the spread right through the suburbs, through the green areas. And he said to me, well, we really need, in the future, we need big houses, 3, 4, 5 bedrooms. People will be still wanting that. So we'll still be retaining large lots. I said, what's your interpretation of a large lot? He said 300 square metres. That is not a large lot in my opinion, and I think we really need to be very clear in our communication with the community. Otherwise, we're just talking in very nebulous ways, and I don't think it's honest. So I think we really need to make sure that we're imparting what our intentions are or what the notions are so that we get proper feedback. I just wanted to offer that comment. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Councillor Young, for the question and the additional comment. Sorry, Councillor Fowler, you were next.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. I just actually had some questions through you to the EGM in regards to our current dwelling target that's set by the state government. So when we're looking at the South East Queensland Regional Plan, we're aiming for the city to deliver 185 new dwellings by 2046, and that's based, sorry?
185,000.
185,000, not sure what I said. So 185,000 new dwellings by 2046, and that's based on a reduced population to dwelling target of 2.1. So it used to be 2.5, and I'm just wondering from the city officer's perspective if we agree with that trend in that reduction of the average population to dwelling target that the state government has set.
So through you, Mr Chair, Councillor Fowler, I'll start and our team might want to stop me or talk as well. It's something that we're continually working with the state at the moment. So we've obviously got a new state government at the moment. They are talking about whether they do start a review of the South East Queensland Regional Plan now or later. So I think all of that at the moment will be subject to further discussions. Whether we agree with it or not, I think we've accepted the last part of the SEQ Regional Plan review, which was the year, time goes so quickly, last year, the year before, 23. But it certainly is something that we'll be presenting to you over the next couple of months. We have got word that they may be talking to local governments about what the proposal is for the SEQ Regional Plan soon. So I'm happy to brief committee after we get some word on that.
Just to follow on, if I may, Chair. So I'm conscious that the census takes place next year. So when that work happens and there may be updated data, there may be different trends to that average dwelling per population target of 2.1. If the census data shows a different outcome into the current situation in average population dwelling targets and forecasted based on what the current need is and what the predicted need is, because we haven't done that for some time, and would that have an impact on how the state government moves forward with dwelling targets?
Through you, Mr. Chair, Councillor Fowler, it could do. So we know that in terms of the assumptions that they're using, they are re-looking at the way they do all of their planning from that perspective. So it might do, it should do.
I'm just conscious, sorry, through you, Chair, just conscious with the predicted population growth to more than 1 million, if we were still working off that average population to dwelling target of 2.5, we'd be actually having a target of 35,000 less dwellings. So, thank you.
Conducively, it could also go the other way and increase our target. So I think from memory, they take a 10-year trend with that because the census data changes every time by a little bit. And I think typically with regional planning, they take a 10-year trend point of view. And for what it's worth for you, while census is only done every one of those periods, I know developers especially have other tracking that they do regularly, and their tracking would say that that census data is smack bang on. That's why we're seeing a lot more focus on 1 bedroom and 2 bedroom product, because there is a demand for it being driven by that. But I appreciate your point, and as Alicia said, we're aware of the early talk about what a regional plan review might look like and when it might occur and what it might envisage. But those figures over a 20-year period probably are going to make a huge difference. Alicia?
I think one thing our teams have done a lot of work at over the last few years is getting ready for those conversations, Councillor Fowler. In the past, we probably haven't had the data to be able to really have a detailed conversation to rebut sort of if we disagree or we don't. So Sam's team, Peter Cramp's team have done an exceptional amount of work to get ready for us to have that evidence base to have those discussions. So I think if they do decide to do it, we obviously need to be much stronger in those discussions that we have through that period. That's my opinion.
Councillor Patterson.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. A couple of questions. First, when we started on this, we started with an ambitious target of completing our city plan by the end of 2027. Do we think that that's still viable?
Through you, Mr. Chair, Councillor Patterson. We are working towards that. We're on track with everything we've committed to you. But I think I've said it a number of times of the scope is what we have to be really disciplined with. So we're not up to having that discussion yet. When we are, that'll be in the second half of this year into next year as well. We'll be very well armed to say what pushes out the timeframes, because if we don't hold that scope, so I'm just making this up, we might have 10 things in it and there might be 40 things that want to be put into it. So for me personally, I think the scope is a really important thing here. That we're not ready for that discussion yet, but I think for me with councillors, we need your support in that for when we're actually saying this is what we think we can deliver by 2027, whatever the timeframes are. If we add in an extra X amount of things, that blows out that time frame, to be blunt.
It's Councillor Patterson, do you mind if I just add very quickly? It's one of the critical importances of the directions paper. It will be the document that we reflect back on to be able to help with adjusting scope on things, of where we'll spend more time in the next 3 years versus things we may allow to slip into a work program outside of it. But completely agree with Alicia, the scoping part is critical. Trina has been feverishly working away on what the next 3 years looks like to achieve those goals. The final point I'd make again, and you might be about to make it, is I think if you look on one of the pages, we've got a timeline in there. We're still showing 12 months for the state side of things.
Yeah.
It will be the state government that is the critical part in this. We haven't shied away from that. We make that point every time we can, and importantly, the early signs with the state reference group is very positive that the new government and new people up in state recognise the fact that they need to be at the table earlier with local governments. Otherwise, we're wasting a lot of time and resources.
Okay, thank you. So I've got two connected questions. The first one, and this I'd be curious of examples of scope that you mean, of what needs to come in and what needs to come out. But one specific matter which I recognise is coming up in other cities now is the interest in family communes. So which would effectively suggest that you're going for larger land sizes, but 5 potentially independent units on there. So adult siblings can live with their families and the like. I was wondering, okay, so is that one of those things where you go, okay, scope, not now, because it's just another whole box to consider? I'm not quite sure what types of examples you're talking about scope that would come in or would go out.
Through you, Mr Chair. Councillor Patterson, so for me there's a number of things. So there's what are the priorities that we want to put in the new planning scheme? Are there things that we want to fix from the city plan or tweak in that part? In terms of examples of things, we've spoken a lot about height density calibration. So that could be an example of what do we do? Do we do it now, or do we have a program of amendments that follow on? We work with the state, and that's the importance of having that state reference group that we haven't had before through that process. Our internal referrals, so your environmental planning, your transport planning, I mean this extremely respectfully, they probably have a list of X amount, 40, 50 things that they want. We may not be able to do all that in the first iteration of this planning scheme. So it could be things like, are we looking at car parking rates? Are we looking at setbacks, built form? Everything and anything that's in a city plan is what I'm talking about. So we've got to be able to define and say, these are the things that we think are a priority for the first cut of the planning scheme. And do we have a program of amendments following that? And can we do that within the timeframes that we've been given? We work with the state. Are they supportive of it too? I think getting that early support and early no's from the state government, we've been quite clear. I've had a number of chats with the new state planner, who's a really impressive lady, and she's keen to support us too. So it's all of that. And I don't know what the answer is at the moment, but all the work that's being done at the moment will inform us going into that stage to get the scoping done.
Thank you for that. Yeah, one last question, which is related to that. So on page 579, you've got the identifying the major collaboration points for each of our stakeholders, and looking at Queensland Government, we're looking at their policies, their zoning regulations and the like. One thing that I'm curious about and perhaps concerned about, we've identified in this, we've identified that there is a need, again on page 568, in terms of the affordable housing. We've come up in recent years in where there does appear to be a bit of a conflict between what our city plan says, what we are thinking in terms of, for example, work on the Southport PDA, in terms of where affordable and public housing should go, and then where the state just puts it without any influence or input from us. So I would be very, given that it's identified as an essential element that we get it right in terms of affordable housing, in those collaboration keys with the Queensland Government, I'd like to see it considered as one, because if we don't, they just end up doing whatever they want, wherever they want, later and down the track. So, for example, the Southport PDA, which is on hold at the moment, but the research that was done on it last year identified we actually have a risk now of too much public housing in one place. So anyway, yeah, I don't need to go into detail, but how do we get that into here, and how do we identify that as a collaboration point at the beginning of this process rather than, yeah.
Through the chair, I can confirm that social and affordable housing is a key component that we're looking into as part of the housing component of the LGMS. It largely sits outside the scheme, but because it's considered as part of the whole, it's so important. So the LGMS will be talking to that to some degree.
So, if I may, so I do appreciate that. However, when it's outlined for me here what the collaboration points are with the state, that isn't one of them. And I would think that that should be a pretty compelling one, because once this is done, they basically get to tell us, and there's not that engagement as such.
Alicia, do you want to respond to that in terms of I think we very much understand what Councillor Patterson's getting at. It probably doesn't need to be called out as such. It is wrapped up in what is in there, but do we have a way to call it out more specifically in there?
Yeah, through the chair, we're happy to call that one out.
Yeah, okay. Councillor Doran, question?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Looking at the directions for growth, there's well-planned and distributed growth, movement and transport choice, and then infrastructure. Aside from one line that says improve the safety, reliability and resilience of our road network, there does seem to be, in my read, an under-representation of road infrastructure. Can you talk to whether or not that is a priority, not just to improve the existing networks, but to add to it, given the growth of expected growth of the population and therefore the people living in those networks?
Through the chair, that sort of advantage of the LGMS process is that long-term strategic planning for those major infrastructure projects that we need that time to advocate for, whether it be to state government, to federal government. So those sort of major infrastructure new projects are definitely a priority for the LGMS. In terms of the initiatives, there's definitely some elements that are a little bit more BAU, things that are underway, things that are BAU for the city, such as that continuous improvement of safety of existing transport infrastructure. But the sort of new infrastructure is definitely a priority, and that's sort of represented through that movement network map, which largely consists of sort of upgrades or new transport infrastructure.
Follow-up, Chair. So new transport infrastructure is referenced throughout as things like plan and deliver a connected walking and cycling network, and another one, to be fair, is delivery of high-frequency public transport networks. But I suppose I'm seeking two things. I'm seeking some comfort that there's not already a predetermined decision around the removal of cars and therefore car parking ratio for new developments, and whether that's still an open conversation that we can have with the team as we go through this planning work.
It is, and the LGMS, the directions paper, is ultimately designed to influence the scheme, but it's, from a transport infrastructure perspective, it's definitely not the only influence. There is the work coming out of the transport team, and they're the ones sort of advising us on there as they develop up their approach for the way and sort of continuous changes with population forecasting. It's also very much subject to the allocation of growth through the growth scenario. That is sort of the background to the directions paper in terms of what transport infrastructure is needed to support that growth allocation. So as that growth allocation is continuously refined throughout the development of the LGMS, that transport conversation will continue of what's needed to support that city and that growth allocation across the city.
And the car parking ratio. Yep.
Yes.
And just one final one, Chair. The LGMS talks about various distribution of growth and identifies different areas, and obviously one of them is Robina. Is it the view, just from a theoretical sense, given that you're our strategic planner, that you can't reasonably load the population without also providing that infrastructure, including the high-frequency public transport network to get people around? I guess my question there is it reasonable from a planning sense to put the people there before you've put the roads and the infrastructure there?
delivery of infrastructure to support the existing population and sort of forecasted growing population is definitely priority, and that's part of the planning for the LGMS and also part of the LGIP process that will follow the scheme.
Sorry, just to clarify, Chair. So I guess my question is, what comes first? Is it reasonable from a planning point to theoretically increase density without having any control over the public transport or the road network that goes to put them around, to move people around that area?
Through the Chair, I think when we're doing strategic planning, we're using theoretical projections. There's a lot of sequencing that happens, so we have to be very confident with that first sort of 5-year, 4-year, 10-year cohort. But beyond that, it is theoretical. So you would be putting the growth into an area and lining up your network planning, but you have a catch-all process where annually and every 4 years and every 10 years, you're recalibrating your infrastructure planning. So it is intrinsically linked, yes.
Questions? Councillor Martin.
Thanks, Chair. Just sort of interested in process here. Obviously, you've got the draft directions paper and we've got some key themes here around, let's say, well-planned and distributed growth, and then some of the initiatives, or I think sort of outcomes. At what point are we testing the how? So if it's sort of encouraging gentle density, at what point are we going, okay, it might be removing 50% uplift or local area planning or, lot sizes? Where are we testing those theories?
Through the Chair, we have been testing with the population urban growth model, which is part of the LGIP process for strategic infrastructure. We've been using that model to develop a growth scenario that I suppose background to that is that in our early research and early sort of planning for the LGMS, it was identified that there is enough capacity within the city plan currently to service the forecasted population for the Gold Coast. However, we quickly identified that that allocation wasn't necessarily feasible, desirable, no longer suiting like sort of the diverse range of our city's residents. So as a part of that, we use the population urban growth model to take a rules-based approach to planning changes within the planning framework, and the model tests how that allocation then distributes growth. So we can see a lever such as reducing minimum lot size. We can see the impact that that has once we apply it with a criteria to the model. We can see the impact that that has. The early outcomes of our scenario, or sort of our current scenario run, is the basis for this directions paper. And there was sort of quite rigorous infrastructure network testing with that scenario to be confident that the directions and initiatives are sort of fit for purpose at this current time. And when we go through developing the full LGMS, we'll be doing another scenario run and refinement to support and doing more infrastructure network testing.
Can I follow on? Thank you for that. Can I just clarify then that what you're mentioning there? So 2016 scheme has the capacity to meet our million population target by 2046. But if we don't change anything, it doesn't align with community expectations. So the new scheme is not necessarily for increased total capacity because we've got capacity. It's just in a different way that is more community palatable. Is that, I'm reading that right? Okay.
Through the Chair. Oh, sorry.
Okay, I'm just, obviously really interested in, as soon as possible, understanding, probably I think we all would be, what those might be. So really looking forward to getting into the detail, I guess. Nitty-gritty. Thank you.
Councillor Gates, question?
Yeah, thank you. Through you to the officers, during early collaboration with the state, have they made it clear what their vision is in terms of perhaps our low density areas as they currently exist and and where they foresee the growth may go?
Through you, Mr Chair, Councillor Gates probably knows the short answer to that question. We've definitely had discussions about a number of policy considerations we're looking at and whether they would support that. They've not been, obviously they've got a long list of things that they're working through in that department. We expect that having this group start, which we're proposing to start in July with the state reference group, will start to get into that detail, and hopefully they come there too with any expectations that they've got on us as well. Because
It's really
we'll need to factor that
isn't
in.
it, that that is established
Absolutely.
very, very early, because otherwise we will never meet our timeframes if a whole body of work is done in one direction and the state has a different vision.
That's correct.
So anyway, I guess the officers will deal with that.
Councillor Gates, I'd agree with Leisha's comments that the short answer is no. I might just stretch it a little bit that what we have seen, but is definitely an expectation and acceptance from not just state officers, but also from ministers and assistant ministers, that it has to be done differently, how this works with local government. I think the state reference group is not only very exciting for us, but there's also a fair bit of excitement up in the state planning area as well, of it being a different approach of how to front load these issues with the state. A regional plan review sometime in amongst this, while not perfect, was always going to happen, and it was one of the main reasons in amongst the list of others of doing the LGMS over a 12-month period is we get through the election, let the new government settle in, a few people find their seats, and then we'll get more of an idea when that timing may be. But at every opportunity, and I've been at a fair few things with the Assistant Minister and the Deputy Premier recently, we keep reinforcing that point that you don't surprise us. Like, you have your state officers in the right areas, really closely aligned with Alicia and the team here, and there's no reason we can't get this done in this time frame. But it is all on them to make sure that time frame can be hit. Other questions, councillors? In that case, I'm happy to move the recommendation. Is there a seconder for the recommendation? Councillor Gates is happy to second. I might leave this for close. I won't do a formal open. Can I check, is there anyone wishing to speak against the recommendation? In that case, I'll just close, open and close at the same time. It's actually a fairly big milestone today when we had our first committee of the new term 12 months ago. The team laid out what the path for the next 12 months was going to look like. It's the first time that we met Civic Shifts and started to talk about an LGMS and what that looked like. So I'd acknowledge today it is a key milestone in a journey that Council committed to 12 months ago. In my opinion, LGMS has proven to be incredibly successful so far. We have seen a much broader engagement across the entire Gold Coast, especially a different kind of engagement for commencing planning scheme work compared to how it was done under the previous amendments in the 2016 scheme. LGMS has delivered upon the promise of an opportunity to have a different conversation with residents from the very north to the very south and everywhere else in between. And that always had to be a key outcome, because what we wanted was not just survey results with a text box with people saying what they wanted to say. We needed qualitative data. We needed evidence to be able to back up a directions paper and back up future assumptions. So it hasn't just been a case of different sectors or different suburbs in the city raising complaints or raising concerns. It has been qualitative, very north to very south, from age 15 to age 90, male, female, different backgrounds, different suburbs, different aspirations for the city, to ensure that the data we collected through LGMS could really be used for officers and for us as the elected wing to fall back on to justify some of our decisions. Councillor Martin teased one of those ones out. LGMS and those conversations has led to us doing scenario testing to move some of those dwellings around the city, because it clearly showed that the current pattern wasn't what the community's expectation was. LGMS has allowed us to have an honest conversation with Gold Coasters about their concerns about growth and possible negative impact. It's not all sunflowers and blue skies. There are plenty of challenges, very real challenges, that residents and business owners should rightly want to raise with officers and raise with councillors. There are plenty of possible negative impacts. But it's also allowed us to have a conversation about the very many positive opportunities that can come with growth. And it's been really pleasing, and I take the moment to thank officers and councillors who attended a lot of those in-person sessions to hear some of that feedback from Gold Coasters face to face. The LGMS directions paper is a key document. a key document that will be used to reflect back on at every opportunity as we progress forward with policy work and drafting of the new scheme. Critically, it should be a keystone document for councillors to rely upon to show the intent of the broader community and when we're defending decisions. Community engagement with reference groups will also reflect back on this direction paper. It will be a constant reminder in every policy workshop and every reference group to be able to come back to and say, well, yes, that is an idea, but the directions paper based on that data and evidence said we should be more looking this way. We've set an ambitious goal of establishing a planning scheme advisory group, an industry reference group, state reference group, community reference group, and the community insight panel. An intent to get the right people who are truly interested in our city's future and having some honest, strong conversations all at the table at the same time. I think it's a key point. We're not talking about doing it just during public consultation. We're front-loading this new planning scheme by having effectively the best part of 500 people regularly engaged on a month-to-month, sometimes fortnight-to-fortnight basis to be able to run policy stuff back through them, run scenarios back through them, and use them as a check. Go back to the community reference group. We heard you say this, we've gone away and done some work, here it is again, does that now reflect what you said? Making sure that that language barrier that was quite often a problem during the amendments of what town planners would say and what they thought the community said, not being reflected back to them when we went back out to consultation. Can I acknowledge Civic Shifts and PSA for the incredible effort over the last 12 months? Not only have we had some experts in their field, but I hope you'd agree with me that between Jen, Shannon and Mal, we've also had some incredibly invested individuals who not just bring their professional skills, but brought a true investment in our city. Their job isn't finished. They continue on in this space, but it has been a really big effort. I'd also acknowledge city officers, especially Trina, Sam and Jordana. It has been an incredible effort from this team to get us to where we are today. I'm not afraid to say that 12 months ago, I think there were some concerns about timeframes and about the scope of works and how much we had to fit in and could we get it all done. I sit here today and would put on public record that my confidence in our ability with the work program that is now in front of us and what we've put into this, I am more confident than ever that we can hit that time frame of having a new planning scheme in place before the end of 2027. I'd also acknowledge councillors who attended numerous workshops, but have also been having a lot of discussions in and outside of committee. I've been really pleased that I've had a lot of councillors calling up to want to talk about things coming through the workshop. Importantly, you've also been taking plenty of opportunities to take briefings with officers, take briefings with Mal and Shannon as well. It's a really clear sign the level of interest from this chamber into the new planning scheme. I'd make the point, as I always do, that we made a promise, I made a promise, officers made a promise 12 months ago that councillors were critical key stakeholders in this. You are critical key stakeholders for the city and should be treated as such. I hope you feel like over the last 12 months that you're getting a taste of that we're putting councillors in that position. And that isn't just planning committee members, that's every councillor being encouraged at every opportunity to get a part of this. That's going to be really important because while this has been a big 12 months and the LGMS directions paper is a key milestone, I say to you, the work is only just beginning. And in a few weeks' time, when we lodge our Section 15, that is the shotgun start for what is going to be an absolutely massive couple of years. You are about to get a hell of a lot of calendar invites put into your calendars for monthly workshops on numerous policy decisions, on numerous policy things. A lot of the things that you raised questions about today, they're going to come out in policy workshops that will be a monthly occurrence moving forward, and in some cases, fortnightly occurrences. And I'm going to finish with that while I appreciate your efforts so far, just to again encourage you that we need every councillor at as many of these workshops, as many of these discussions as possible, because it's going to be through all of that work and your work outside in your communities, hearing their feedback, that we get this new planning scheme right and we get endorsement for it at the end of 2027. Because without a new planning scheme, our dwelling supply is not going to increase. Our ability to hit our job targets is not going to happen, and the other consequences as well will continue to flow on, and that's not an option that we should be willing to have. I'll close debate with that. All those in favour of the motion? Against? The motion is carried unanimous. Emma, thank you very much. Trina, Sam, thank you as always. Councillors, that takes us to item 7.1. It's a closed session item, but we'll check first if there are questions on the item before we move to closed. There is questions. Councillor Fowler, the questions that you can ask in open, would you like to go to close? Not sure. Let's just be safe then and go to close, shall we? So I'm happy to move us to close, and Councillor Patterson's happy to second. All those in favour? For the reasons on the screen, against, motion carried. Please turn off the Live streaming on, thank you. Councillors, we are at item 7.1. We've had discussions, some questions in closed, and we're now back for the recommendation. Councillor Fowler, are you happy to move item 7.1? Seconder for the item? Councillor Peter Young. Councillor Fowler, do you wish to speak to the item?
Thank you, Chair, and through you. This update to the charges resolution reflects the changes we've seen in the industry in the past decade and helps bring our infrastructure charges in line with today's planning needs. The recommendation replaces the secondary accommodation exemption with a more suitable exemption in line with the statutory definition change in 2022 from family accommodation to secondary accommodation. It also removes the exemptions currently listed under sections 5.1 and 5.2, which will be phased out over time, giving the industry time to adjust. I believe this is a fair and reasonable step forward.
Speaker against the motion? Councillor Fowler, you wish to close it all? In that case, we'll take the vote. All those in favour? Against? Motion carried unanimous. Thank you very much, gents. We'll move to item 7.2, our last matter for the day. We welcome Tim Robertson and Andrew Saunders to the chamber. Cool. Councillors, so we don't have a presentation on this item, but given some legal implications, if there are questions, I'm happy to consider them an open, or if we wish to move to close for questions on this item. No questions? So there's no presentation, Councillor Doran, so if there's questions from the report to officers, I'm happy to go to closed. Or if you'd like clarification or anything, I'm happy to go to closed.
I wouldn't mind going to closed to ask my questions around suggestion.
Councillor Doran has taken us to closed. To seconder, Councillor Gates. All those in favour? Against? Move to closed session. Live streaming on. Councillors, we are out of live streaming dealing with item 7.2. Thank you for the discussion and questions and debate during that item. I'm happy to move the officer recommendation who would seek a seconder. Councillor O'Neill is happy to second it. Councillors, difficult. Sorry, Councillor Patterson, you can foreshadow.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I have a foreshadowed motion that we defer this to full council. Thank you.
Yeah, it is, but that's okay. It's a procedural motion, that's fine. At least it's there and there's an intent. Yeah. So it achieves the same thing, Councillor. The intent's clear. Councillors, so noting this is a closed item, it is difficult to talk too much on it, apart from to say that this issue has got a long history, and a lot of the information about what happened in that history is not available to us or to officers or even to the owners involved. And I don't think we're ever going to get all of that clarity there. So I'm not too interested in focusing on what happened in the past and who is to blame, because I don't think we're ever going to establish that. What we have is a problem in regards to an encroachment onto council land that continues to bubble away. We've been given a recommendation based on a report from officers that is backed up with a lot of legal advice, that it is the firm view of the city administration and that independent legal advice that the best path forward for this council is to resolve to sell this section of land so that this item is then dealt with, noting that there are many things to come in the future. I think it's known. So, councillors, anyone wish to speak against the officer recommendation?
Chairman, I don't mind supporting this today, but there's been a lot of unanswered questions, and I want to make it clear that I would like all of the suggestions that have been put forward to the officers today answered before the meeting of full council, so that we can determine the very most beneficial outcome.
And I have no problem with that, councillor, because I think they would all be changes on top of this recommendation, not necessarily a change to the intent of it.
So rather than supporting a deferral, I'm going to support your motion, but on the basis that I may change my mind after the rest of the information comes forward.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Councillor Patterson, you wish to speak against?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Chair. I think it is important, given, as we've said, we still have so many questions about this that are unanswered. Some of the responses that we received suggested that there may be some, at least some slight amendments that we would make to this. There is no downside in deferring this to council, and what it does send to council is a message that this wasn't a decision by this committee based on the information that we received at this time. It was a decision by council that there was not sufficient information, and I appreciate that there is certainly enough work and information that's been done by officers, but it is something that we really do need to digest. It's a very disappointing issue, and it's not something that we want to rush through. I see no downside in deferring this matter to full council so we can address all the matters that we've said are coming for us to make a clear decision. Thank you.
Speaker for the motion, Councillor Curtis.
Thank you, Chair, and I thank the officers for their comprehensive answering of a barrage of questions that have come at them today, and I feel like, in the most part, they were answered to give us a very strong indication of the likely outcome of the future responses, and they won't change what I believe the recommendation will land on, and so I would support it as it stands as a committee recommendation, noting that we look forward to that finalised detail before full council. Thank you.
Speaker against the motion? I'll close debate. This is the second time this item has come through committee. In between, there's been numerous briefings from officers, and I include, I think, the vast majority of councillors of not just this committee, but councillors in general, took the opportunity for one-on-one briefings with officers. It is not a simple item and something that we deal with regularly, hence the amount of questions and detail, but I'm very confident based on the officer report and recommendation that at least putting this up to full council as a recommendation of this committee, fully noting Councillor Gates' comments, and I agree with him that doesn't preclude anyone at full council making adjustments, but there are 12 of us here, and I'm confident based on the conversation and debate enclosed that we have enough of an intent from committee to put it forward. We'll close debate with that and take the vote on the recommendation. All those in favour? Against? The recommendation is carried. Councillors, I didn't receive any general business items beforehand. Can I just check very quickly that no one's got one to raise? I don't see any hands. I don't see any hands in the air. Councillor Dora, did you have a GBI?
I do. As a matter, it was raised because of the C-Bus Stadium Transport and Traffic Management Plan review. If you would take it, Chair, I'll give some words, but I was wondering whether or not the city officers could do a review of the Robina Stadium traffic area and any suggestions around improvements or reductions of that size and scope of that area. I don't know when it was last reviewed, but it occurred to me it is in place for some time, and whether or not there's some changes to that need to be made or reviewed.
Madam EGM, does that sit with your area, or does that sit with infrastructure?
So through you, Mr Chair, Councillor Doran, if that was in relation to parking times and things, we'd have to work with infrastructure. So that would be
actually, sorry, it's actually in relation to the overall area that is demised as the official Robina Stadium traffic area.
Okay.
And it encroaches into various parts of the area, and I'm wondering whether or not that's been reviewed and if this was an opportunity. Well, I knew I'd have your support if that was where it landed.
Could I suggest to you, Councillor Doran, I think because it definitely does entail infrastructure Gold Coast and planning regulation. We've got Transport Committee next week.
Getting rejected.
If we can get some words, I just want the correct words worked up to make sure that we tie both groups in correctly.
Okay.
Otherwise, it's a wasted time. So we'll save that GBI for Transport next week.
100% rejection at Planning Committee for GBI.
Councillors, it is 12:27. Thank you for today. We'll close the meeting.